Okay. So we left off on... We left on... Which one? I'm so sorry. 18. So, famous Greek teachers. So it turns out there was like 3 famous Greek teachers that we talked about by name. This teacher, he was famous for like teaching by asking the students like think through issues by questioning. And he also famously taught other guys. He actually taught this guy named Aristotle, and Aristotle taught this guy named Plato. But this guy got in so much trouble in his society that people were questioning their religion, their gods, and he actually was executed. He was killed. He was given poison because he was considered a troublemaker. Which Greek teacher am I referring to?
Socrates.
That's Socrates. If you don't know, it's Socrates. It looks like Socrates, but it's Socrates. 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 So he was like the most famous of the teachers. We also, number 19, have this word Hellenization. Hellenization is the spread of what? Greek culture and Greek language. In fact, if there's one dude that we could like argue was very much responsible for the spreading of Greek culture and Greek language, who would we say that?
Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great. You know, in fact, he even named cities named after himself all over the world called Alexandria. There's like Alexandrias everywhere, but the most famous one is in Egypt, which had like the world's largest library. So that's Alexander the Great. He helped spread Hellenistic Greek culture. We call that Hellenization. Number 20, going to India, we have the Varna system. Varna literally means color, and we have another word for this system, this pyramid of social hierarchy. We actually call it, and we'll write down for 20, the caste system. So you remember the caste system, you don't get to choose your caste. How do you figure out what caste you are?
Where you're born.
Can you change in your life?
No.
No, you're locked in. So if you're born a priest, you're a priest. If you're born a warrior, you're a warrior. If you're born a laborer, you're a laborer. And also in the caste system and this Varna system, what's the lowest you could be? Untouchable. Some people are so low you can't even touch them. 21, part of this Varna or this caste system happened, it is often thought, because of something that occurred called the Aryan invasion. And India was invaded by a group of people called Aryans. And what was somewhat different about them compared to the original Dravidians that lived in India? Yeah, these were lighter skinned invaders. And when these lighter skinned invaders took over India, they set up a social hierarchy, and the lighter skinned people got the best jobs, and the darker skinned people didn't. We even see this in India today. We mentioned that in India, one of the beauty products that women buy is called Dark and Lovely, which its purpose is to lighten your skin. So we see that, in Indian culture, even to this day. We looked at, I think, a video about what's called colorism, which is discriminating based on skin color. We see this not only in India, but in Mexican culture, more broadly, Hispanic culture in general. We see this, sadly. We'll talk more about this when we get to the 1500s. We see it in various Asian cultures as well. So number 22, reincarnation. What determines the life you have right now?
Your karma.
Your karma. And that's like the collection of like your good and the bad deeds. So basically, reincarnation says that you're living the life that you deserve. Reincarnation is saying that you live the life that you deserve. If you right now are like an amazing person and you're a millionaire and you're healthy, you're wealthy, your family loves you, you love them, things are like thriving, what kind of person were you in the previous life? A good person. If on the contrary, you're like teaching world history at a local high school, what kind of person were you in the last life? Questionable, questionable person, you get what you deserve. You get what you deserve. Reincarnation, the life that you live is based on your last actions. That's reincarnation. Now, there are some problems with this. In fact, there was a philosophy/religion that grew out of Hinduism. Some people thought that they were a little uncomfortable with the caste system's rigidity, and they thought, I think anyone, if they try enough, can escape. And this ends up becoming its own religion who was dissatisfied with Hinduism, started his own philosophy / religion? Buddha. So we call this philosophy that grew out of it Buddhism, which is Buddhism. Buddhism. You might remember that one thing that Buddha said that was cool was that caste doesn't really matter anymore. Anyone can become enlightened. And the whole purpose is to like stop reincarnation, because reincarnation is terrible. Like you don't want to come back to Laporte High School again. And already this is like our 30,000th life or something like that. So we want to stop that. And there's a word, not for heaven, but for really achieving a state of mind. Nirvana. We'll write down the goal of his philosophy is nirvana. Nirvana. Now, after Buddha dies, there's two different types of Buddhists. There is the Mahayana and there is the Theravada. There's a difference between the two. One of these actually worships Buddha as God. They pray, they worship, etc. And the other one thinks, well, you're a great teacher, but you never actually said you're God and you actually never wanted it. So I'm not going to like consider you to be God. The one that worships the Buddha as God is Mahayana. They worship him. They've added more and more traditions over time. And today, Mahayana Buddhists worship, they pray to, they treat Buddha like a god. But then there's the other ones, and they're called the Theravada, and they don't worship him as a god. They think Buddha's a teacher, and you have teachers you respect, like you might have Miss Holloway, and like, wow, she's like a great math teacher, but you're not gonna like worship her and like have a golden rabbit statue for Miss Holloway. You know, like you're not gonna do that. That'd be weird. And so they respect the Buddha, absolutely. He's a teacher, but I'm not gonna worship him. So these are the two types of Buddhists, the Mahayana, who worship the Buddha, and the Theravada, who say he's a teacher, but he's not God. 26. Speaking of Buddhism, there was a famous man named Ashoka. And Ashoka, he was like an Indian king, and he was famous because he was like pretty brutal. In fact, he killed like thousands of people, and he felt bad about it. And he was like, if there's only a religion or a philosophy that can give me like a way to live my life and a way to like make things right, and he found Buddhism. But now that you have this super powerful, super rich man who's a Buddhist, he decides, what should I do with my power? What should I do with my influence? What should I try to do? And guess what he tries to spread with his power and his influence? Buddhism. So he's a famous Indian ruler who helped spread Buddhism. He was a killer who converted, who later tried to spend his life spreading this religion of Buddhism. Who's another killer who converted, who spread his life spreading his religion? Paul. You might remember in Christianity, there's this guy named Saul originally, and he murdered Christians, but he converted. He's similar to Ashoka in that way. Number 27. There's an institution, a group of men that had the power in the Roman Republic. They passed laws, they led the government. What is that group of men called? They were the Senate, which is Senate. Now, sucks to suck, but the Senate wouldn't always rule. In fact, what dude overthrew the Senate famously, and then he himself got, like, I don't know, stabbed 47 times? Yeah, Julius Caesar. That's a bummer for him. But number 28, we have this term called Pax Romano. What does that literally mean? What kind of peace? Yeah, so literally Pax Romana means Roman peace. And we'll talk about what caused it and what effect that had. You know what caused the Roman peace? It was relatively safe in the Roman Empire, and people were like afraid to break the laws. And the reason why that was the case was that the Roman army was really, really good. In fact, the Roman army was so good that people knew if you broke the law, what crazy torture did the Romans have? Crucifixion, right? So the Romans like didn't play around, and they decided, people did, that it's actually not safe to break the law. So people didn't. And that's what we call this time Pax Romana. The cause was they had a really good, scary army that enforced the rules. What effect will that have on society if people are afraid to break the laws? If people are not going to be criminals in the levels that they were before? What's going to increase because it's safe? With trade and travel. One of the effects of Pax Romana, number 28, is trade and travel went up. Because I'm not afraid to travel on the roads. I'm not going to get kidnapped. I'm not going to get, robbed. There's Roman armies. There's Roman order. So trade and travel went up. You could go from Egypt to England, not worry about things. Pax Romana. 29, Romanization. What's Romanization?
Spread of Roman culture.
And language. What's the language that the Romans spoke? Not Greek.
Roman.
No, there's no such language as Roman.
Hebrew.
No, not Hebrew. That's of the Jews. This language, by the way, is what?
Arabic.
No, they don't speak Arabic in Europe. This language later evolved into Portuguese and Spanish and Portuguese and Italian. It's Latin. Many of you said it. So it's the spread of Roman culture and Latin. The fact that there is Spanish and Italian and they sound similar, it's because they both come from the same original. They both come from Latin. They're Romance languages, right? Number 30. Paul and the spread of Christianity. We mentioned him just a moment ago. He was like a killer who converted. And the thing about Paul is that he wants to spread Christianity. And there's something that he's going to actually use to spread Christianity. He lived in the Roman Empire. And what did the Romans build that made it physically easy to trade? And like for him to go on mission trips. Well, but physically, what did they build? Roads. We'll write down for Paul on the spread of Christianity, he used Roman roads. Because Christians go on what kind of trips? Mission trips, right? And so it turns out Paul's like, well, if I live in the Roman Empire and they build like thousands of miles of roads, I'm just going to go ahead and use those roads to spread my religion. So even though at times it was illegal, he used the benefits of the Roman Empire to his advantage. 31. Christians in the Roman Empire. It wasn't always like this, but when it was terrible, what could happen to Christians? They could be killed. They were persecuted. I think sometimes they were like dipped in tar and lit on fire. There was like these Colosseum games where they had gladiators and they would like feed Christians to the lions. It wasn't always like that, but it could be like that because what did the Romans want the Christians to worship as a sign of loyalty and respect? The emperor, right? They put a little statue, and Christians, like the Jews, were unwilling to do so. They were unwilling. And so the Romans persecuted Christians. They killed Christians. They wanted them to worship the emperor, and Christians, being stubborn, kept saying no. There was a document we looked at on last Friday from a guy named Pliny the Younger, who wrote the Roman emperor, who's like, hey, I question Christians, and I ask them, are you a Christian? They say yes. I say, hey, this isn't a game. If you say yes a second and a third time, I probably have to kill you. But some Christians, so-called, or some people would get out of it and say, oh, I'll just cuss out Jesus and I'll show you I'm not. And we saw that relationship. So it was kind of a rough 300 years. To be a Christian for 300 years meant you could have been killed at any moment during these times of persecution. 32, Christians and social structure. What are the kinds of people that early on were important followers of Christianity? Women, absolutely. In fact, women, oddly, are heroes in these Bible stories. Women don't run away when Jesus gets arrested. Women were the first to see what? Well, they saw him die on the cross, but they saw the risen Jesus, right? When the men were like, oh, stupid women, you don't know, like the women believed. And so women played like a pretty key role in early Christianity. What other types of people were important and followed Jesus early on?
Slaves and prostitutes.
Slaves, prostitutes, poor people.
Those 6 were the ones that were saved.
What's that?
The ones that were Oh, leprosy.
Oh yeah, so like these are not like if you're thinking, oh, who are your friends? Oh, former prostitutes, people who have chronic illness, women. Like people are like, this is like a religion you want me to consider converting to? Like it's not like what you would think, right? It's like all these rejects socially at the time. But those were the people who converted to Christianity. Like women. It was popular with women. It was popular with former prostitutes. It was making people into former prostitutes. Poor people, slaves. This is like the types of people, and maybe that's why they were easy to persecute, because these aren't powerful people, right? They're people that you can and do push around. You might remember Jesus said about rich people, he once said, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get to heaven. So Jesus was criticizing the social betters. He once said the prostitutes are getting to heaven before the priests. And so like Jesus is constantly criticizing people for their bad behavior. 33, the Arabs. The Arabs didn't farm. It's way too dry for that in the Arabian Peninsula. They are what we call nomads. They travel throughout the Arabian Peninsula, often with the assistance of camel. They're nomads. And number 34, the most important city in Arabia to this day,
Kaaba.
the city, Mecca. And the most important building in Mecca, Mecca is Mecca. The most important building in Mecca is the Kaaba. The Kaaba has changed over time. You might remember originally it had what inside? Hundreds of statues. Today it is empty, but it is a very key building. We'll see that in a moment. Who brought the revelation to Muhammad as Muhammad was dissatisfied with the polytheism he grew up in? He was raised and was a polytheist, but he was like, I don't get the whole statue thing. Who does he say showed up? Gabriel. And Gabriel gives him what? Super important book? The Quran, right? So it says in the handout, the Meccans have a response to Muhammad. Muhammad says, there's no God but Allah, and Muhammad's his prophet. There's no God but one, and there's no statues allowed. Are the Meccans who have the Kaaba going to be fans of Muhammad? No. In fact, they persecute him. The Meccan response to Muhammad is persecution. They treat the early Muslims very poorly. So poorly, we have a vocabulary word called the Hijra. Hijra means escape. Muhammad knows his community is not safe. They need an escape. They need to have an evacuation. And where do they go during the Hijra?
Medina.
They go to Medina. Still on Hijra, Medina is Medina. And they're invited to Medina, and it's cool. Like actually in Medina, Muhammad is accepted as not just prophet, but almost like the president of Medina. So he's like the total ruler. It's pretty great. This Hijra, this moment at 622, so important. Muslims start what in this year, 622? Their calendar. Now that Muhammad's in charge of Medina, he's like president and prophet. There's one community, this one community of Muslims ruled by Muhammad's rules and laws and vision. We call this Muslim community the Ummah. The Ummah is the Muslim community. And things are great. In fact, he eventually takes over Mecca. But you know what? Sadness, Muhammad dies. And after Muhammad, what types of people rule in his place? There are caliphs. After Muhammad, there's caliphs. Caliph, a caliph. Those people rule. Now, is there total agreement about who should be what caliph and what order?
No.
No. Talk about that in just a moment. 40, the Quran, of course, is the holy book of Islam. It's considered the most perfect book ever written. There's no mistakes in the Quran. But then there's this other word called the hadith. And let's say that I'm looking for how to treat my wife, or I'm looking on what's the rule of divorce. Step one always is look in the Quran. Step two is the hadith. What is the hadith?
Muhammad's words.
Yeah, the things Muhammad said and the things Muhammad did. These are the words and actions of Muhammad. They wrote them down. Like, we got together and said, let's all write down everything we ever remember Muhammad saying and everything we remember Muhammad doing. And you can, like, right now read everything he said about marriage, about children, about anything. Actually, it's online, or you could buy a physical copy. It's called the Hadith. Below that, Hajj. Hajj is the trip that you have to make to Mecca. You might remember that every Muslim once in their life has to perform Hajj. It's the trip to Mecca. You have to go to the Kaaba. But before Mecca was ready for the Hajj, what did Muhammad do to the Kaaba to make it right in his mind?
He destroyed all the statues.
Exactly, he had to destroy all the statues. But today, every Muslim who has the health and wealth must perform Hajj. You have to go once before you die. 42, Ali. Which caliph was Ali? He's the fourth caliph, but he's important because he is related to the prophet in two important ways. One, he is
His cousin.
cousin, which is important because that means he's the closest living male relative. Kind of a big deal in a patriarchal culture. But he's also the prophet's
Son-in-law.
son-in-law, right? So it's pretty important. And because he is related to the prophet by blood and marriage, people thought he should have been what caliph in order?
The first.
The first, right? So there's some tension. Someone who doesn't like so care about Ali is Aisha. This was actually Muhammad's favorite wife. And she hated Ali, and she was instrumental in actually a civil war where the early Muslim community was divided. Are you like Team Ali or are you Team Aisha? And there's pretty good choices. On one corner, you have the Prophet's favorite wife, and the other corner, you have the Prophet's son-in-law, Aisha. Now, Aisha on the backside can't do anything on her own, and there's some muscle behind Aisha, a man named Muawiyah. Muawiyah, will write down, challenged Ali, you might remember. He challenged Ali, Muawiyah did, and he doesn't kill Ali himself, but the conflict does end with Ali dying. And that's sad. And this kind of leads to number 45, the Sunni and the Shia split. There's a split in Islam. There are two types of Muslims, Sunnis and Shias. Of those two, which one is the majority? The Sunnis. They're like 80% of the Muslim world. Shias, or sometimes called Shiites, are 20%. And the Shiites really love who and whose family? They love Ali. They love Ali's family. In fact, they celebrate the death of Ali's son every year. Who is Ali's son? And every year they honor his death. Hussein. Hussein, if you don't know, is spelled Hussein. Hussein. So there are two types of Muslims, Sunnis the majority, Shia the minority. The Shias love Ali. They think Ali is the guy. He got gypped. He has actually, they think, secret information from Muhammad. And you can't really know Islam unless you know Ali and his son Hussein, etc. The Sunnis think all that is crazy. They don't understand that fascination. And lastly, with Muawiyah in charge, he started a dynasty after the rightly guided period. Muawiyah put his family in charge, and I'll say then spell it. They were called the Umayyads. That's spelled Umayyayd, the Umayyads. And with that, we have finished our review. You can have any handwritten notes that you want. You have super great day preparing.